Every year in fantasy football, there are players that we just absolutely do not want to draft. They are the landmines that you have to avoid, mostly just because of their cost or because of some other outside factors. But today, Dave Kluge and I are going to talk about 9 players that we will not draft no matter what, even if there's a fire. I hope you guys get that reference. Dave, this is a fun one because like you and I, we both agree on this first player immediately because of the news that happened over the weekend with Houston Texans running back Joe Mixon.
And before we get into Joe Mixon, I just want to say stick around to the end of the show because we do have some really spicy names that we're intentionally burying a little bit, saving for the end for the real sickos that want to stick around. But yeah, dude, Joe Mixon. I remember 2021 when Joe Mixon had a day-to-day foot injury that lingered for 4 weeks before they inevitably shut down his season and put him on season-ending IR. I mean, this foot injury has been bothering him for years now. And last year, it was ankle and foot injuries that really kind of took his juice out of at the end of the season. And looking at it now, man, I don't want to be like an alarmist, but I'm nervous. We're looking at a 29-year-old who has dealt with consistent injuries on this foot for the last 4 years now. I think he is more likely to never play football again than he is to be the week 1 starter. He's a guy that is just like completely off my draft board at this point. And I was just doing a high stakes draft last week. And this was before the news came out. And it was the one share that I've drafted of Joe Mixon this year. And it's because he fell into round 6. And I was like, I guess at that value, he's too good to pass on. And then the news comes out just a couple days later. No, not even if there's a fire. There's no way that I am drafting Joe Mixon. I've moved Nick Chubb up my board a little bit, but I don't have a lot of faith in him. I think Woody Marks is probably going to be the guy. I'm not a big fan of Dameon Pierce either. This is just a backfield right now that's looking like a nightmare.
Yeah, I think that. So let's get into first the Joe Mixon of it all, the Texans, and then the actionable advice from this is that I think you're right. I think we're Joe Mixon is probably closer to not playing relevant football again than he is to being the starter that we hoped he'd be. Like he was going at one point, Dave, in the 3rd round of drafts, which is nuts. And then with the news, you've seen that ADP dip a little bit into the 4th round, some in the 5th. I don't think that you can be taking him like anywhere in your top 8 to 9 rounds. And even then I struggle. If I get to round 10 and Joe Mixon is sitting there, I'm like, well, what am I getting him for? For an offense that has a bad offensive line, for a team that's likely going to have to pass the ball a lot. And you've seen the investment they've made in receivers, especially in the draft and in free agency and then in the relationship of CJ Stroud and Nico Collins. But that offensive line is horrible. Then they go out and they get Nick Chubb, which I think should have told us all like everything. And you mentioned some of the other guys here, Woody Marks, Dameon Pierce. I'm a little bit of the other way. Like I wasn't a huge fan of Woody Marks. Dameon Pierce, I was a fan of, but that ship may have sailed at this point just because I don't think he's been a good fit there. I wonder if there's an option outside of what we're looking at here. Because it feels weird to be like, I'm out on Joe Mixon, but also I'm in on Nick Chubb. And it's just
right.
Not quite.
Did you see the quotes about Nick Chubb that came out yesterday from a Houston coach?
What was it?
Where he was just like, he plays football the right way. You know, he's strong. He's putting a lot of effort in as a pass blocker. He's got a great career behind him. And I mean, it just sounds like it's really the end of the road for Nick Chubb as well. So yeah, this isn't a backfield that I really want to invest too much in. Woody Marks is probably the guy. You know, I like the prospect a little bit, but he's got some size concerns. I'm worried about him standing up for a whole season if they're giving him a big workload. I think if it really is the end for Joe Mixon, which it was kind of weird, dude. Did you see D'Amico Ryans like snapped at the reporters when they asked about him? And he was like, we're not talking about Joe Mixon's injury. And I was like, okay, well, biggest storyline in Houston right now, but if we want to just ignore it, I guess we have to. But wouldn't be surprised. You know, we've tossed around Zach Charbonnet, Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, a lot of these buzzy names on the trade market right now. Nothing's come to fruition yet, but there's still a lot of camp left. And we see running backs regularly get traded right before week 1. So wouldn't surprise me if they add to this backfield.
Yeah, I wouldn't surprise me if we see decent running back names get cut. Guys that are maybe buried on the depth chart too, that they just say, hey, just, you know, we found it's the best thing for us to do to just let you go so you can go find another home. And they immediately land in Houston where they can, you know, work this out.
Which is how Joe Mixon landed in Houston just a few years ago. Like the Bengals, they were about to cut him. They announced that they were going to cut him. And then the Texans were like, wait, hold on, we'll give you a 7th round pick for Joe Mixon. So wouldn't be surprised if they pull off something like that, which they also just did with Christian Kirk. The Jacksonville Jaguars were going to cut Christian Kirk, and then they traded a day 3 pick for him. So we might see that happen where they just want to like get ahead of waivers. And this is a team that has been willing to just kind of burn 7th round picks on players before they get cut. So we might see that happen again.
Yeah, like I'm trying to think of who might end up over there.
Sean Tucker, Roshan Johnson.
There's Sean Tucker. There's Roshan Johnson. I mean, Khalil Herbert's on the Colts right now, but there's talk that DJ Giddens might be the RB2 there. Like there's a lot of
Miller,
these veterans.
Perhaps. I mean, there's a crowded room in New Orleans. Yeah, there's a lot of guys that are probably not names that we know that probably aren't going to be on 53-man
Devin
rosters.
Singletary goes right back to the Texans.
Yep.
I think that might be the one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's say, regardless of name, we get confirmation of X player is the RB1 for the Texans. Do you have any interest?
It all depends who it is. I mean, if it is Khalil Herbert, I'm probably way back in. If it's Nick Chubb, yeah, probably not so much. I mean, if it's a Breece Hall or a Travis Etienne or a Zach Charbonnet, count me all the way in. But I think it depends on who the guy is going to be, because if it is Devin Singletary, I'd expect a little mix of Woody Marks and Dameon Pierce and Dario Gumbawale and some other guys there. Or if they do make a splashier move for a big name, then we can project more of a workhorse role.
All right, let's go to some of our other players that we wanted to talk about here, because there are some really interesting situations, not just at the running back spot, but at the wide receiver spot. The running back spot, though, that I'm looking at right now, Dave, is for your player, Jaylen Warren for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is a guy that you don't want to draft, and we've seen this same story before over and over and over, where team drafts rookie running back early in the NFL draft, and the veteran who's been sitting there that people are like, well, I kind of like the value because of where he's going in drafts, they get unseated pretty fast. And is that more or less where you're at with Jaylen Warren?
Yeah, and there was a lot of excitement for Jaylen Warren when Najee Harris walked in free agency, and his ADP just hasn't dropped the way that I think it should have after the Caleb Johnson investment. And Jaylen Warren is a fun player, great story, came in undrafted and has carved out an NFL role, but we know who he is at this point. Last year, he was the RB41. In 2023, his best career season, he was the RB25, and his rookie year, when he kind of came out of the scene and we got excited about him, he was the RB51. So what we're looking at is a ceiling of being an RB3, and a floor is RB5. Somebody you don't even want on your fantasy ceiling or on your fantasy team. And I think all of the exciting efficiency metrics, when we look at the missed tackles and the explosive run rate and the juke rate, all those things that people get excited about in regards to Jaylen Warren, it's because he comes in on 3rd and long. And last year, he saw an average of 6.6 defenders in the box. That was 16th among running backs for the best average defenders in the box. Stacked front rate on just 10.8% of his carries, 17th best for running backs. So he's not really seeing defensive looks that most other running backs have to deal with. He comes in on 3rd and long when they've got 12 yards to go, and the defense says, okay, yeah, we'll let you get 10 or 11 yards because we're just trying to stop the first down here. So, a fun player, but at the end of the day, he's an undersized, undrafted, relatively unathletic running back who's going to be behind Caleb Johnson on the depth chart here. And I think that even if Johnson does get hurt, we're not looking at this like sky high contingency upside for Jaylen Warren. The reality is that they're probably going to see some Kenneth Gainwell and Trey Sermon. They're going to get some other guys in the mix there. So this is a guy who, Caleb Johnson is out there, is an RB4. If Caleb Johnson isn't out there, maybe becomes an RB3. But where I've got him ranked right now, I've got him as my RB47 in drafts. And right now, Football Guys consensus, RB26. It seems like people are expecting him to take this big step forward, and I just can't get there.
That's still very high. Like you're basically taking him ahead of, I think, some higher upside guys here. Like, Jordan Mason, I think, has some great contingent upside that Jaylen Warren doesn't have. Taking him ahead of Travis Etienne, who we already have as like the confirmed starter. There's a lot going on. He's going right in the same area as Tyrone Tracy, which I think is just wild. Like, I think Tyrone Tracy far and away is the much better pick at the running back spot.
Yeah, so I don't have a whole much else to say here. We know who Jaylen Warren is. Yeah. People are expecting this big step forward in year 4, and I just can't get there.
Well, and it's not an indictment on the player's talent either. And like, I hope that people aren't hearing what we're not saying. Every time that we say we're not going to draft this player, they go, well, you don't know ball because he's really good. That's not what we're saying. Yeah, Jaylen Warren is a good player, man, but it also has to do with like what Arthur Smith wants to do with this offense. And a lot of it is he loves to have a big bruising back that he can get into the outside and work those zone runs and get downhill and get big chunk plays like that and be able to win at the goal line too. Like, that's not typically what happens with Jaylen Warren. Now, I've been reading that there have been some struggles with Caleb Johnson in the passing game, and that's where Jaylen Warren is going to have his role. But Dave, you also mentioned Kenneth Gainwell, who's a fantastic passing down back. So, I mean, I think there's reason to believe that Jaylen Warren's role itself might be capped by having these other running backs on the roster as well.
Yeah. So again, it just comes down to, I do like the player. I think he's a fun player. I think that his role is really good, but in fantasy, I'm looking at him as kind of an RB4, RB5, and the market is much more bullish on him.
Yeah, I think it should be the overarching theme of what we talk about with players that are going a little bit later in drafts, especially at where Jaylen Warren is going. I want guys with so much more contingent upside. Like Jordan Mason may not be a more talented player or have a better role to start out the season, but the upside there for later in the year is so much better. Like that's what I want if I'm picking in that round. Absolutely. All right. The first guy I want to talk about here is a name that I think a lot of people really like. He had himself a fantastic rookie year, but Sam LaPorta, tight end for the Detroit Lions, I think is just going too damn high in drafts. And like, I'm not in at that price right now. I've seen ADP as high as the third round for Sam LaPorta, but right now, average draft position for Sam LaPorta on footballguys.com, which takes an aggregate of all of the different websites that are doing drafts throughout the summer and at the moment, has him in the fourth round. I don't want to basically have my team need to rely on Sam LaPorta being one of my top 3 or 4 best players, when so much of that is just going to come down to, is the Lions offense going to be good? Is he going to be catching as many touchdowns as he did his rookie year? And then even then, there's so many other things that need to go right. Jared Goff, remember, he's coming off of a career season where really it wasn't a career season. It was like a career 5-game streak towards the end of the year where he was going up against, and I'm not trying to hate against the Lions or what they were doing, because they were a phenomenal team, but we do need that context. If he was going up against a lot of bad secondaries, a lot of indoor games. I did recently watch the quarterback documentary on Netflix, which is great. And Jared Goff even says, weird, look at that. I was able to play well outside when it's cold. And yeah, he had some very good games. Like, I love when
players are like aware of the bit, when they have like the self-awareness to like know the narratives against them. I love that.
100%. And this is, once again, it's not a knock on LaPorta, not a knock on the Lions, not a knock on Goff. It is more we need everything to go right for this player's average draft position to pay off. We don't dislike players, we dislike costs. And right now for the Lions, they're going to have a new offensive coordinator coming in. They lose their starting center, so they're revamping that offensive line a little bit. You're hoping that Jared Goff remains playing at a high level. They've already talked about how they want this offense to run through Jahmyr Gibbs. There's going to be an expanded and continued role for Jameson Williams, who continues to get better, who essentially, if we're really looking at this as kind of going into his second year of being an NFL player, because of the weird start to his season. And I can't draft a guy in the fourth round who doesn't make a big difference for me at the tight end spot. Like, I need that player to be so premium in comparison to the remaining tight ends. And when I look at LaPorta, and he's 11th in receptions last year, he's 12th in targets last year, he would need to really take a massive jump where he's top 3 in targets. He's going back to his rookie season where he's having amazing touchdown variance. He's having amazing target rate. I'd much rather go for a guy like Tucker Kraft in the 10th or David Njoku in the 8th round than I am Sam LaPorta in the 3rd, 4th, or even 5th round.
Yeah, and you remember, I got dragged through the mud last offseason for my fade on Sam LaPorta, but when you look at what he did in 2023, I said, like, hey, he's a good player, but I look at usage. I think usage is just the most predictive metric going forward. That's a sticky stat year over year. And the usage in year 1, he was 6th in target share, he was 6th in air yard share. And I said, that's good. He's getting like middling tight end 1 usage, but the touchdowns are what really pushed his value up there so much. And then going into year 2, target share, 14th among tight ends. Air yard share, 7th among tight ends. His usage didn't really change that much. The only thing that changed was that he didn't score as many touchdowns, and his fantasy floor kind of fell out from under him. So I think he's a fine player. I've got him ranked in that kind of middling tight end 1 range, which is, I think, where he belongs. I've got him lumped in with Travis Kelce and TJ Hawkinson. But it comes down to value. Like you said, going in 4th round, we did an NFFC high stakes draft last night where he went at the top of round 4. And I just don't really get why people are getting there. It does feel like there's this dead zone in the tight end landscape this year.
Yeah.
Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, TJ Hawkinson, Sam LaPorta. I don't want to pay up for those guys because we're looking at, like you said, David Njoku, Tucker Kraft, Tyler Warren, Colson Loveland, Evan Ingram, Mike Gesicki, these guys that are going later in drafts that I think are going to give you similar upside, and you don't need to pay up for them with a 4th or 6th round pick. You can get them in round 10 and beyond. So for me, I am totally content just waiting on tight end this year if I don't get one of those top 3 elite guys.
And by the way, I also think it's very reasonable to believe that the Lions will not pass as much as they did last year. Last year, I mean, their defense got decimated by injuries. They had to pass just to be able to score more than other teams. And then on top of that, they lose David Montgomery. So if we really want to go down this narrative of not having your between the tackles runner, you're missing so many of your players on defense, you're just passing at a nonstop high rate. And Sam LaPorta really became like 3rd or 4th in the pecking order in what should have been a very good passing situation. Yeah, I just don't want to bet on that early. So it's just there's too many of these factors that we want to embrace risk. We want to embrace volatility, but not this early in a draft where your team basically rests on that player being a success.
And I think talking about that tight end dead zone is a perfect segue for the next guy that I want to talk about.
Is it because the quarterback dead zone? Is that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure we mind melded there because I was like, wait, do you have another tight end on this? Yeah,
no. Quarterback dead zone. Yeah. And this is something that I have talked about a ton this offseason. There's just been a big flattening of the quarterback position. And again, back to that NFFC high stakes draft that I did last night, I very proudly, Joey Wright and I, we drafted this team together, and we very proudly were the last team to take a quarterback. We doubled to have quarterbacks and walked out with Justin Herbert and Caleb Williams. And I just feel great about doing that when you could wait on quarterback and still walk away with a high end guy. And right now, Baker Mayfield is a guy who I think is just kind of the poster child for a dead zone quarterback this year. A lot of it comes down to being a potential regression candidate. I mean, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were red hot last year, and Baker Mayfield, career highs in completion percentage, passing yards per game, rushing yards per game, touchdown rate, QBR, success rate, first downs, completions, attempts, yards per game, and on target percentage. I mean, just a career year across the board for Baker Mayfield, and he finished as a top 5 quarterback because of it. He scored just as many points last year as Joe Burrow. So unless you're expecting that to happen again, he's just being a little bit overpriced. I think that when you see a quarterback do this, just have this kind of fluky year where they just across the board have career highs in all of these statistics, it worries me a little bit because we typically see those guys regress then going into the next year. And I think that he is a good player as well, Baker Mayfield. I like him, but it is so hard for me to pay up for that tier of quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, Jared Goff, they're all dead zone quarterbacks in my opinion. They give you almost no rushing upside, and you can get a Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love, CJ Stroud, Trevor Lawrence, Matthew Stafford a lot later. And those guys, if the variance breaks in their direction, could have a top 5 quarterback season just like Baker Mayfield did last year. But even in addition to those guys, I look at Caleb Williams and Bo Nix and Justin Fields, Drake May, JJ McCarthy, these young guys that also have rushing upside. It's just so hard for me to look at these quarterbacks going in like the QB5 to QB10 range, paying up for them when I know that I could be the last guy to draft a quarterback and still walk away with a potential QB1. I can take 2 quarterbacks and double my chances of walking away with that guy. And it's not a knock on Baker Mayfield. It's just kind of the market as a whole. I just don't like any of these quarterbacks going in the mid rounds. And Baker is the one that I think is just the most mispriced of them all.
I mean, Dave, you talk about going after these quarterbacks late. And first of all, I love that. By the way, you and I are doing a live draft. No?
Yes.
Very soon? Tomorrow?
Yes. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., we're going to be drafting on Drafters, trying to win $500,000. Dan Henry, actually, football guy staffer, he won that contest last year. So we've got a nice partnership with Drafters now. We don't have it on the schedule yet, but Alfredo, you'll also be joining me. I'm telling you right now, but within the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to have you come on the Monday night live stream as well. So you'll do one of these high stakes drafts with me.
Cool. Thanks. That's what my wife does. She'll let me know in front of people. Like, by the way, we're doing that thing next week.
Now
and
you
I'm
can't
like,
say no because of the implication.
But we'll talk in the car, Dave. We'll definitely have a talk on the way home. Dude, you talk about like these quarterbacks that are going later, and it's just, I don't want to have to go and invest in a Baker Mayfield or Patrick Mahomes early like we're doing right now when I can get Drake May as quarterback 16. I'm looking at some of the other guys in ADP here. Jordan Love at quarterback 17, Trevor Lawrence at quarterback 12. Like, I think there is the same amount of upside for a Trevor Lawrence as there is for a Baker Mayfield. And I know how 100%. Crazy that is to say, From everything we've seen, from everything we've seen,
last year.
I know. But from everything we've seen, Baker Mayfield has been the better player. So don't hear what I'm not saying once again. But just like you said, Dave, same offense with really good weapons around a guy like Trevor Lawrence. And you know who I actually really like? I like Bryce Young. He's going as quarterback 25. Like, he can just be your last pick of your draft where you don't even have to worry about quarterback the whole time. Obviously, that's a little risky, but yeah, Cam Ward's another one. I mean, like, yeah, you can really do like a little quarterback Frankenstein if you want. Just get back to streaming.
I think the earliest that I'm willing to kind of dip into the quarterback well is Kyler Murray. Going off the board right now is the QB9 because he's got a very high ceiling. And then after Kyler Murray, then Brock Purdy, I like him as well. You know, he's got some rushing upside that we saw last year. Justin Fields, Caleb Williams, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert. I think that's kind of the tier that I'm willing to get into the QB market, but I just don't want to pay up for any of the guys going ahead of them.
Yeah, you mentioned Dak in there. I really like him. I really like him. I think we just underrate him every single year, and we've seen him be productive and probably the best wide receivers, pass catchers of his career right now, like together. You know,
I think you go back to what he did with CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper, but he was the overall QB1 that year. So yeah, you know the upside.
Yeah, I think we'll see it. All right, next guy I want to talk about here. I've mentioned him a couple times this offseason, and I want to make sure that I stay here because there's a lot up in the air right now about Rashee Rice and his looming suspension. But Xavier Worthy is a guy that I'm simply just not interested in drafting because of his cost right now, Dave. And he's a guy that ADP's got him going in the 4th round. Like there's just a lot going on in the 4th and sometimes 5th round that I'm not interested in, specifically like the guys I talked about so far, Sam LaPorta, Xavier Worthy. Like if I'm going to look here at ADP at guys that I'd rather have in the 4th round, it's Ken Walker, it's Alvin Kamara, it's Omarion Hampton. Like that seems like a really good spot to start drafting some of those running backs. Even if I do want to invest early in tight end, I'm looking at George Kittle being a guy that I can go with there. But you know, some of these guys that are going a little early, it feels like we're drafting them at their ceiling. We're drafting them at the spot that we want them to be. And this is so anti-Sigmund Bloom here because he's very much, we don't know the ceiling, and the outlier could now be the median. And that could be the case here for Xavier Worthy. Maybe we've just scratched the surface with who he is, but we've seen these sort of breadcrumbs, these telltale signs from his college film to what he did as a rookie initially with Rashee Rice on the field. And then really when it started to come together for him was when Rashee Rice was gone. And we were kind of hoping that, like, okay, when I say we, I mean the royal we, as like the fantasy community, is that, you know, Xavier Worthy is going to take that next step, right? It's not just going to be touchdowns. It's going to be volume. He's going to get more efficient with everything. His role completely changed when Rashee Rice came off the field. He moved into the slot for 40% of his snaps. His average depth of target cut in half so that these targets were easier and allowed for him to run after the catch. And then, of course, on the big stage in NFL playoffs and Super Bowl, we're seeing touchdowns. And so it's just like, yeah, all the marketing went really well for Xavier Worthy towards the end of the season. And now with the Rashee Rice suspension looming, listen, it could be 2 games, it could be 6 games, whatever it is. The problem is that when Rashee Rice gets back, that's the Rashee Rice role. And I think even more so is that even with Rashee Rice out, the Chiefs have planned for this. They went out and they draft Jalen Royals, who I think matches exactly what Rashee Rice does and can probably do that role better than Xavier Worthy, which I know is weird to say about a rookie who had such a good season, but Jalen Royals fits that underneath guy. I'm going to catch and run and be sort of that same thing that Rashee Rice and Deebo Samuel have been. Whereas Xavier Worthy, we saw what they wanted to do. They wanted him to be the field stretcher. They want him to be the guy that can do the Tyreek Hill things downfield. And just unfortunately, that's not been a thing that Xavier Worthy has been good at, is winning contested catches and consistently being able to track the ball well. So I don't want to be taking this risk on Xavier Worthy so early in my drafts. I've got him as my wide receiver 29, and looking at where he's going right now, Dave, he's going at wide receiver 22 in drafts. And I think that's only going to go up as more news about Rashee Rice comes out.
You know, the NFL season is a whirlwind, like so much just gets lost in the fold. But before they put Xavier Worthy in that role, they tried putting Juju Smith-Schuster in that role. And then Juju Smith-Schuster got hurt and they went out and they traded for DeAndre Hopkins. And then DeAndre Hopkins just, you know, completely fell off the age cliff. Xavier Worthy was put in that role out of absolute necessity because he was just the last man standing. Exactly. Yeah. And I look at it, I just kind of thought about this morning when we were talking pre-show and we were talking about the players we were going to discuss today. And I went back and I looked at like the old Eagles team, and it feels like there is similar archetypes here where Jeremy Maclin was that underneath guy, the Rashee Rice type of player. And he was very consistent. You knew what he was getting every single week. And then you had Deshaun Jackson, who would have the huge blow up weeks. I think Xavier Worthy is more of that Deshaun Jackson prototype. The issue is that he doesn't have the ball tracking skills that Deshaun Watson did. We saw it last year consistently in the first half of the season. They were trying to hit Xavier Worthy on these deep shots, and he just couldn't connect with Patrick Mahomes. So they had to start manufacturing these short, easy, gimmicky touches for him, but he doesn't have the play strength to do that. He can't make the catches through traffic. He can't make plays after the catch. So I think them going out and getting Jalen Royals does signal that Rashee Rice might miss some time, but that's exactly what Jalen Royals did in college. He's going to take that short little slant, make a big play after the catch, break some tackles. And I think Xavier Worthy goes right back into that very inefficient role that we saw early in the season. Now, of course, he could connect every now and then. We saw it in the Super Bowl, him connecting on a deep ball. He does have the speed to get behind defenses, so there could be the occasional blow-up game here, but I'm not expecting the usage we saw over the second half to carry over. I think that what we saw in the first half of the season, where he is stretching the field and missing on these deep plays, I think that's a lot more of what we're going to see now in year two. I don't want to miss out on Xavier Worthy because he has a very good athlete on a good offense, and that alone is a little bit alluring. It's really easy to poke holes in the profile, but I'm sprinkling him in like maybe 5% of my leagues just in case I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think that's important to point out too, because like I think there are people that will do their rankings differently, where, for example, I think if most people will say, hey, this player is my wide receiver 29 in my rankings, I would draft him ahead of my wide receiver 30. That is the case for, I think, a lot of people. For me, and I think you as well, we're doing that more so on projections, where this player is most likely to finish the season. However, that player at wide receiver 30 has some better upside. And I'd probably rather draft wide receiver 30 over wide receiver 29 in that round, which I know it's like, to people hearing that, you're like, well, that's stupid. Just rank that player higher. But they're like, I think there's a lot more nuance, which is why I love doing these shows, because we can explain the context of it all instead of it just being so black and white of like, this player is ranked ahead of this one. Like, fantasy football rankings are not that simple.
Exactly. And I think, again, like I feel like I'm annoying you by keep continuing to bring up this NFFC live stream that we did last night. But Joey Wright and I, like, we started off our draft running back, tight end. So we didn't take a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds. And what we started doing is we weren't adhering to our rankings necessarily, but when we started attacking these mid-round wide receivers, we were swinging for upside on every single pick. So we ended up walking away with 4 rookies. And in my flat rankings, there were some veterans that I preferred ahead of those guys. But we said, because we are backed up against a wall right now, we have such a weak wide receiver room, we don't want to take the vanilla shots on the Josh Downses and those types of guys. We're going to.
How'd you know my nickname?
But we were taking Luther Burden and Trey Harris and these guys that have much wider ranges of outcomes, because that's what you need to do in certain builds. So yeah, flat list of rankings is great, but there's always nuance and added context that goes into those rankings.
Scratch that. I'm going to make that your nickname. Alfredo Brown and Vanilla Shots. All right. Vanilla Shots, hit us with your next player here. It's another wide receiver.
And I don't think we're going to get too much pushback on this one. Chris Godwin, dude, that ankle injury is scaring me. We saw that picture going around from about a month ago where ankle is swollen. You see some clear atrophy in the calf. Like, he just doesn't look like himself. Had to get a second procedure done on that ankle this offseason. Still isn't practicing. And I'm guessing that the team's concerns about Chris Godwin's ankle explain why they spent a first-round pick on Emeka Egbuka. And on top of that, I mean, Egbuka, we are getting like just a huge, steady drumbeat about Emeka Egbuka. Baker Mayfield called him an absolute stud a couple of days ago. They've talked about his versatility, his ability to play inside and outside. But if he does take that inside role as the slot receiver, that is just terrible for Chris Godwin. Ryan Heath from Fantasy Points shared this a few days ago. In the slot, Chris Godwin over the last 2 years averages 2.58 yards per route run, which would be 6th among wide receivers. And he averages 0.58 fantasy points per route run, which would be about 7th. So we're looking at like a top 6, top 7 wide receiver when he plays out of the slot. When he plays out wide, that yard per route run drops down to 1.78, which would be 46th. And the fantasy points per route run drops down to 51st, just 0.36. So a lot of numbers there. But basically what we're looking at is a top 6, top 7 guy when he's playing out of the slot, and a top 45-ish, top 55-ish guy when he plays out wide. So if Emeka Egbuka ends up taking over that role out of the slot, that pushes Godwin to a very inefficient role where he has to play out wide and isn't nearly the receiver he was. So we're looking at an aging guy coming off a season-ending injury that required a second surgery, now has competition with a rookie who profiles for the role that he has been very valuable in. I like Chris Godwin, the player, a lot, but there are just so many red flags this year. I'm just not doing it. This feels a lot like Cooper Kupp last year. We're coming off a very, very good season, and we just brushed off the concerns about Puka Nacua breaking out, and Cooper Kupp just kind of fell off the age cliff and wasn't the player that he was. I'm not saying that's exactly what's going to happen with Chris Godwin, but it's definitely possible this year. And with where he is being drafted right now, his ADP of wide receiver 34, I've got him ranked as my wide receiver 46, which means I wouldn't be comfortable drafting him unless he falls like 3 to 4 rounds below ADP. And even then, it's not a click that I'd feel good about in my drafts.
Yeah, there are just guys around Chris Godwin that I feel a lot more excitement. And that's the thing, is like when you get later into the rounds, you don't need comfortability with players. You need excitement for what their upside could be. And I think that the upside for Chris Godwin gets limited by Emeka Egbuka and by the injury. Whereas if I'm looking at guys like, yes, I know I'm going to hear the groans and grumbles like through the screens here, but Chris Olave, I think, has a much higher upside. Looking at Rome Odunze taking the next step for the Bears has a much higher upside at the same cost. Even Jacoby Myers is like a safe player that still has top 24 upside, being drafted at wide receiver 39. Like there are players
all of those guys like 10 spots ahead of
Khalil Shakir is another guy
rankings.
Like this. Ricky Pearsall,
Jaden Reed, Khalil Shakir, Josh Downs, Matthew Golden, Jordan Addison. I'm taking all those guys ahead of Chris Godwin.
Yeah, and you mentioned one of the Josh Downs is getting drafted like 2 to 3 rounds later. So it's just, if I can get the same player with better upside at a discounted price, I'm going to do that every time. And I think that's a lot of what it is. It's not just looking at the player from that one POV. It's being able to look at that player and the surrounding areas, like what's on the map around that player, so you can get the best value out of your drafts.
I am this close to putting Demario Douglas ahead of Chris Godwin after the week that he has had at camp, talking about how he is just seizing the opportunity, playing as that slot receiver in the offense. I might do it.
I'm not there yet. Maybe I will be. Maybe. I'm in Stephon Diggs, so. All right. Let me go to my next guy here. And this is a similar situation, but it's not injury related. It's more just offense related, and just seeing the outlier season from Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns. And this is a guy that you look at it. You mentioned Ryan Heath, and he does great work with the stats that carry over and are very predictive of fantasy success. And one of those being a first down per route run. Jerry Jeudy was 44th in that metric. And so this wasn't a player that was highly efficient. 30% of his fantasy points last season came in 2 games. One of those being the revenge game, where you get the revenge narrative against the Denver Broncos. Like, this was something where it's not even the volatility that you look for in guys that can win you weeks, because he just simply didn't. When nearly a third of your fantasy production comes in 2 games, you're a guy that's actually more likely to just lose me weeks over and over and over. And I think we can look at last year and say, man, the Browns were in a really bad situation offensively. They're still in a really bad, if not worse, situation offensively. Like last year, at least it was Jameis chucking the ball to Jerry Jeudy. Like now it's worse. He finished outside of the top 50 wide receivers in a third of his games. Like he had to survive on these games with insane volume, but poor efficiency, just over and over and over. We get Cedric Tillman coming back. You've got a Browns offense that wants to establish the run. We're not sure what's going to happen there with Quinshon Judkins and the other guys on the offense there, but the fact that there are so many question marks on a bad offense for a guy that needed to be efficient to be a fantasy success worries me, because it tells me that with him, that volume isn't even going to be king with him. Volume didn't quite matter. It was highly efficient performances in those 2 games that he had. And so I don't want to be drafting this guy where he's going in his 6th round ADP. I've got him as the wide receiver 39. And I honestly want to move him lower. Like I when I look at the ADP and I see Jerry Jeudy or Stephon Diggs, I want Stephon Diggs every single time. And that the Patriots are another struggling offense, but the upside is there for Stephon Diggs with getting volume and a guy that we saw him doing it earlier in the season on a game-to-game basis. So Jerry Jeudy, I'm just out.
Yeah, I mean, this is the second time we brought up Stephon Diggs, so I've just got to say, Jerry Jeudy, I've got him a few spots higher than you, wide receiver 36, but I've got Stephon Diggs as my wide receiver 24. I mean, I think this is like the most mispriced player in fantasy right now. I've been aggressively taking Stephon Diggs in almost every single one of my drafts, but when it comes down to Jerry Jeudy, I've got George Pickens, Ricky Pearsall, Chris Olave, Devonta Smith, Cortland Sutton, quite a few guys ahead of him, and we talk so much about the Colts and how they are going to be so like the quarterback in Indianapolis is really going to change up the projections, whether it's Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones. But you could say the same about the Browns, because if Joe Flacco is out there, give me Jerry Jeudy. Like I will be fine with Jerry Jeudy if we're getting 17 games of Joe Flacco. But if Kenny Pickett's out there, Dylan Gabriel's out there, if Shedeur Sanders is out there, I don't want any part of this passing attack.
That's the thing, man, is I don't think we're getting 17 games of Joe Flacco, even if he is named a starter.
Yeah, I don't know if we're getting much of anything. Like it sounds like we're getting, kind of this rotation out of camp, and just where the Browns are at right now. Like, what benefit is there to putting out this old veteran? Like, they're not going to be in playoff contention. They're not getting any sort of look at the young guys that they have in the quarterback room. So, well, Joe Flacco might be the best quarterback. It doesn't really help the Browns at all at where they are. Like, they're in the midst of a rebuild, and putting a 40-something-year-old quarterback out there doesn't help them assess their talent. So, if we get down to Kenny Pickett, don't want that at all. We've seen he has really struggled to elevate any wide receivers around him. Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders, I have very little faith in them either. So, Jerry Jeudy is another player that, if you look at the projections with Joe Flacco, you can really convince yourself that Jerry Jeudy should be going in the top 20. But then when you zoom out and take that 30,000-foot view of the Cleveland Browns as a whole, you just say, no, I don't think I want to do that.
Dude, honestly, the Browns, just go and start your young guys. Like, just let them all do it, and let Joe Flacco be the Udonis Haslem of the Browns, and just kind of hang out in the locker room and be the guy. I know he can play. It doesn't do you any good to try to win games right now. Like, just seriously, get the first pick. Let these rookies play. See if you've got something there. But I mean, I just don't want any part of it for fantasy. All right, Dave. This is what you promised everybody. And by the way, I learned over the last week while on vacation. You're familiar with Book Talk? Are you familiar with that?
Like TikTok for books?
Yeah. So this is where like sorry if I'm like lifting the veil for the audience here, but this is where it tends to be some of our ladies are reading these smut books. And they have levels of spice, I've been told, where you'll get like a chili pepper ranking from 1 to 3, 3 being ultimate spice. If I had to give you a chili pepper ranking for your fantasy football smut right now, this is 3 chili peppers for you, Dave.
It's a Carolina Reaper. Is that what we're talking here? Yeah.
Yep.
I got to say, man, my wife reads some of those books, and we were on a plane not too long ago, and I just like glanced over and just caught like half a paragraph, and I was like, what are you reading? Like, you were in public. Close that book.
Don't do it. Don't. Gabby reads them too. Don't do it. It's going to make you question everything.
Yeah. This one, I've tiptoed around it a little bit, but I'm ready to plant a flag on it. I'm just so out on Amon-Ra St. Brown this year. And it sucks. You look at my rankings, like it's not a huge dissension between where I have him ranked and where the the consensus has him ranked. But where you're going that early in drafts, people adhere closely to ADP. So right now, Football Guys has him ranked as the wide receiver 6. ADP has him ranked as the wide receiver 6. I've got him as my wide receiver 11, which means that he would just have to fall basically a whole round for me to be able to get him. And that has yet to happen in any drafts that I've been in. So I don't have any Amon-Ra St. Brown right now. And we talked about this with Sam LaPorta. Usage is the one thing that I am looking for more than anything. And by target rate, how many targets he draws on every single route that he runs. His rookie season, 24.7 was 31st, but we saw that over the second half of the year jump to about 28%, where he was one of the most targeted receivers in the NFL. In 2022, he was 3rd in target rate. In 2023, he was 5th in target rate. In 2024, fell to 17th in target rate, which was worse than what he was getting over the second half of his rookie season. Last year, in 2024, dips in target share, target rate, air yard share, targets per game, receptions, first down, fantasy points per game, and yards per game. He made up for it with a career high in touchdowns. Now, I think anybody who drafted Amon-Ra St. Brown is saying, like, what are you talking about? He was still the wide receiver 3 last year. He was, because he scored a lot of touchdowns, but he had the worst usage since we've seen since the first half of his rookie season. What was that?
People were really frustrated throughout the year. I remember people being like, dang, this was a wasted pick. Amon-Ra is like, he was sort of a bust this year, which is crazy to say looking back. That's why like the season long numbers do tend to like inflate things a little bit. And looking back at 17 games and like the seasons, fantasy football gets played in these pockets of, 4 or 5 games. And, right. It's when the Lions got hot, man. The Lions got hot for those 5 games. And that's when everything started going their way. Like I do think the Lions in general are a little bloated in average draft position.
Yeah, I mean, there was an 8-week stretch where Amon-Ra St. Brown scored 9 touchdowns. He was averaging over a touchdown per game. But if you look beyond the touchdowns, there were games in there that, like, if he didn't score a touchdown, we would be completely panicking. I mean, 4 receptions for 37 yards. He had a game where he had 2 catches for 7 yards. He happened to score a touchdown in that game. So he still, was playable in your flex spot. 56 yards, 60 yards, 45 yards. I mean, this is not what we expect from Amon-Ra St. Brown. And again, I was looking, on the overall fantasy production, the raw production was fine, but he was 3rd in outperforming his expected fantasy points last year. He would have been the wide receiver at 19 in expected fantasy points based on his usage last year, but the touchdowns just really inflated his overall finish. So talked about this with Baker Mayfield, talked about it with Sam LaPorta last year. He's just a huge regression candidate right now. Jameson Williams broke out, and we are very much so in on Jameson Williams this year. Sam LaPorta is going to be healthy after he spent the first half of last year dealing with an injury. There's been this huge coaching brain drain where they have lost not only Ben Johnson, but also like every single positional coach. Talked about how that team was just red hot over the last 6 weeks of the season last year. That really inflated a lot of the values for all of these Lions players. But if Jared Goff goes back to his career averages, Amon-Ra St. Brown maintains the usage that we saw last year, there's just no way to justify him being a first-round pick right now. And that's still where he's going off the board in fantasy drafts.
All right, dude. I got to tell you, this is a little nutso crazy. I'm not going to lie.
Okay.
I see the downside for Amon-Ra. Yeah. I see the downside and like, I get it. I've got him right now ranked as my wide receiver 7. I can be talked into wide receiver 8. So like in that order, right? I've got Nico Collins at wide receiver 6.
Yep.
Amon-Ra at 7. I can push Amon-Ra down below Brian Thomas Jr. I can push him below Drake London. I can't push him below AJ Brown, Ladd McConkey, JSN. Like I can't get there with him. I think 9 is my absolute floor. And I double checked this at wide receiver 11. You are lowest in the industry on Amon-Ra St. Brown.
That's all right. I'll take it. Yeah, I've got Ladd McConkey and Jackson Smith-Njigba ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown.
No, I can't.
Guys that are going to be the clear-cut wide receiver ones on their team with very little target competition. I just get nervous seeing that fall off in usage last year. And this is something Jeff Bell and I have talked about a little bit on the Dynasty show, but Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I know people are going to like be so upset that I'm bringing up prospect profiles, but just bear with me and listen for a second here. Amon-Ra St. Brown was a relatively unathletic 4th-round pick who was pushed into the slot role when they didn't have any other wide receivers available. Jameson Williams was a flawless prospect, like drafted 11th overall with a torn ACL. And then he had a gambling suspension. It was a really rough couple of years to start his NFL career. But if you're looking in a vacuum at Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams is faster. He can get behind defenses in a way that Amon-Ra St. Brown can't. He can now run the full route tree that we've seen just slowly kind of growing over these years. You look at what he was doing at Alabama, and you look at what Amon-Ra St. Brown was doing at USC, and they are just tiers of difference in talent level right now. And I know Amon-Ra St. Brown has really, defied the odds of a 4th-round pick, and he has been a steady player over the last couple of years. But I think in a vacuum, Jameson Williams is the better player, and we're starting to see now it doesn't take a whole lot to just shave a little bit off of Amon-Ra St. Brown's production. Amon-Ra St. Brown's usage and push that in Jameson Williams' favor. Jameson Williams is a much more efficient player. I think these guys are much closer in projections than ADP makes it out to be. I've got Amon-Ra St. Brown as my wide receiver 11, and I've got Jameson Williams as my wide receiver 18. I think it is very much so in the range of outcomes this year that Jameson Williams outscores Amon-Ra St. Brown in fantasy.
I think you're right. It is within the realm of possibility. There is a world. I'm a big Jameson Williams fan. I was big on him coming out of Alabama. He was my wide receiver 1 in that draft class, and I got crushed for it. And it's because I saw the potential going forward, and that's what you want. You want a ball of clay that you can mold in the NFL. He wasn't the most NFL ready prospect, and that's what dings these guys through the process. I've got him as my wide receiver 23. And I've got Amon-Ra St. Brown as my wide receiver 7. I cannot in good conscience say that Jameson Williams is a better player than Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, that's where you and I I'm going to vehemently disagree that Amon-Ra St. Brown is a much better player than Jameson Williams. Does one offer more upside for his draft cost? Yes. And that's where I'll agree with you. If it came down to it and I have to say, okay, draft Jameson Williams in the, 6th or 7th round versus drafting Amon-Ra St. Brown in the 1st or early 2nd round, I'll go the Jameson route there. But yeah, I don't know that Amon-Ra is a guy like I just have to avoid. Like this is going to be where you and I disagree.
Yeah, and I mean, the reality, like, I just don't get him in drafts because when I'm at that point in the draft, I easily prefer Nico Collins. I easily prefer Brian Thomas. I easily prefer Drake London. And then I have Amon-Ra St. Brown in the same tier as Ladd McConkey and JSN. But by the time those first 8 wide receivers are off the board, first 9 wide receivers are off the board, Amon-Ra St. Brown being a part of that top 9, I just never get Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, I might even be convinced to sprinkle in some Amon-Ra St. Brown over Ladd McConkey, but the reality, like, I can't take Amon-Ra St. Brown ahead of Drake London, Brian Thomas, or Nico Collins. I've got him in the same tier as Ladd McConkey and Jackson Smith-Njigba, but just having him down, all it takes is being like 3 spots lower on a player than the consensus for you to never get that player. And unfortunately, that's just where I'm at with Amon-Ra St. Brown this year.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right, we'll stop fighting. And last player on here so we can get out. Last player that I've got, I think is a pretty easy one. It's Deebo Samuel. And Dave, like, I think you're also going to agree with me on this one. I think that the consensus has sort of caught up on the draft cost, but even at the cost, like, I just don't want it because we go back to the lesson from this episode, which is just when you're getting into these later rounds, it's going for upside. It's getting players that you think can finish well above where they're being drafted. And right now, Deebo Samuel, he's my wide receiver 48. I got to pull up the ADP. I should have had that there. It's not on my show sheet, Dave. Here we go. I'm scrambling. Wide receiver 37 is the ADP right now. I don't think it's likely that he finishes well above that. Like, this is a guy that everything would have to go right in terms of touchdowns. Jaden Daniels stays healthy. He gets enough targets with Terry McLaurin on the field. Like, there's a lot of things that have to go right. And Deebo himself has to stay healthy. We just saw last year, he was not the same player anymore. Like, I don't know if you remember the final 7 weeks of the season, Dave. He only had 1 game. Like, he had 1 game over 22 receiving yards. This was just not the same guy. Like, he wasn't able to get open. You're going to have to rely on a guy that, and I get it, the training camp videos show he's in the best shape of his life. We do this all the time. It's just not good business to be investing in wide receivers over the age of 30 that need to rely on athleticism to win and that need to rely on, I don't want to call them gadgety plays, but a lot of design plays where everything has to go right. And that is kind of the thing that's happened with Deebo. And I know Jaden Daniels last year, he threw plenty of screens, and this is something that they want to get Deebo involved with. Deebo's going to have to be able to break tackles. Deebo's going to have to be able to create yards after catch, which I know throughout his career he has been able to do. He is a unicorn. That has been something that he has been able to do over the last 5 years. So there's a sliver of hope here where everything goes well. But at his age, with his injuries he's had, with the way that last season ended, I don't want to have to make that bet here. I don't see the same upside.
Yeah, and real quick, you did say over 30. He is still just 29, but man, he is like aging on a bell cow running back.
I think
curve.
That's what it is.
Yeah, he is not aging on a typical wide receiver curve with the way that he plays, his tenacity, all the carries that he has had. I don't think you can look at him on the same curve as other guys. And then the one other thing is, like you said, the yards after contact or the yards after catch, something that he's really been renowned for over the last 5 years. It has gone down each of the last 5 years. In 2020, 12.1 yards after the catch per reception. Do you realize how insane that is, Alfredo? Averaging over 12 yards after the catch per reception. Dips to 10 the year after, 8.8 the year after, 8.8 again the year after that. Last year, career low 8.3 yards after the catch per reception. You also look at his broken tackle rate. He broke 1 tackle on 42 receptions last year. He used to average breaking a tackle 1 in every 6 carries. Last year on 42 carries, he had 1 broken tackle. I mean, he just is not the player that he was. Those are the metrics that I care about for running backs: yards after the catch, yards after contact, broken tackle rate. I judge Deebo Samuel the same way that I look at running backs, because he's not a receiver who is just going to line up and beat a man in press coverage and make a play. He is a guy who is going to rely on his athleticism, and all of the advanced efficiency metrics are telling us that that athleticism is just waning. And I realize, this team does need somebody to play alongside Terry McLaurin, and he can get fed some short touches here and there, but I'm with you. I forget where you said you have Deebo Samuel ranked, but I've got him as my wide receiver 51. So very low on Deebo.
Yeah, I've got him as my wide receiver 48. And it's the game you play. Like when you start to look at what is around that player, I'd much rather see what the upside is with Matthew Golden. I'd much rather see if Brandon Ayuk comes back as the same guy he was prior to injury. I'd much rather take Khalil Shakir, who can lead his team in targets with the MVP at quarterback. Emeka Egbuka. Yeah. Okay. So that's we're going to wrap up the show. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I think I would rather do that. But Dave, this has been fun, man. I think we gave enough context as to why we don't want to take these players. It's not just that we hate the players or we hate their off. Like there's so much more to it. It's always about you don't like the price for the players and what the potential upside could be, especially with some of these guys we're talking about later.
You're being mean to us in the comments.
Yeah, we're people too. Actually, no. Roast Dave for the Amon-Ra St. Brown thing. It helps the algo keep boosting. Guys,
this is a tough show though. Like, jokes aside, this is a tough show because it's fun to hype players up. We love that part of fantasy football. It's not nearly as fun to besmirch the names of these athletes who have given their life to the game. But at the end of the day, we don't dislike any of these players. It just comes down to value and projections. These are just players that we think are overvalued compared to where we have put in the work, and we've done the rankings and we've done the projections, and we say, I just don't think that they can get to this value that the market thinks they can.
Yeah. Well, guys, we're going to be back again. By the way, first week of doing 2 episodes per week. Ooh. We're going to be back again. Is it the first week of doing 2 episodes? I don't even know where we're at.
That's news to me, man.
I think we did it last week. No. Well, we got the Hall of Fame game. We're finally going to have football. It's not going to be great football, but we're going to have football on TV. It's not great. It's not great. But
every year I get so excited for the Hall of Fame game, and then by 4 minutes into the first quarter, I'm just like, all right, let's see if there's a new Bob's Burgers episode.
No, it's not it. It's not it. But I'm looking at the schedule here, David. Next, Thursday, we're going to have early round players to target in your drafts. And then the following week, we'll be going on to mid round steals, late round sleepers, kind of just working our way down the draft board there as we continue to fine tune our rankings. I don't know. There's also travel here at the end of the week for me. Maybe we push that to Monday and we just go straight into we'll let you guys know. You're going to find out. Just so make sure
subscribe.
We don't even know the schedule. So make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel and to the podcast on Apple or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, make sure you're following us on all the social media platforms, Alfredo A. Brown, Dave Kluge, because we're going to be putting that stuff out there for you guys. But as always, I just want to thank everybody for watching and listening all the way through. You guys truly just make this I've been using this term a lot lately, but a labor of love. We enjoy it. We put in a lot of work to it, but it's all for you guys. It's for the connection that we get to make and the amount of fun that we get to have. So seriously, thank you guys all so much for watching and listening. And for myself and for Dave, we'll see you next time. Adios.